unemployment, bankruptcy, homelessness, a global economic crisis. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic about our global economic recovery? Exploring the impact and seeking solutions, United Nations University presents UNU Conversation Series, The Economic Crisis.
So, welcome to this edition of the UNU Conversation Series on the Economic Crisis, organized in connection with the June 2009 UN Conference on the World Financial and Economic Crisis and its impact on development. I am Jean-Marc Coicaud from the United Nations University. And with us here today, we have Professor Janos Bogardi, who is Director of the United Nations University Institute of Environment and Human Security, based in Bonn. And Professor Bogardi is here with us today to talk about the recent financial crisis, still unfolding, and how this crisis is influencing human security with regard to specifically environmental factors. So, Professor Bogardi, as a way to begin our conversation, why don't we begin simply with the following question: what is your definition of human security? And second of all, perhaps, how has human security been affected by the still unfolding economic crisis?
Human security is a relatively new concept, both internationally and also within the UN system. The human security is probably best characterized by the definitions or mottos given it in the publication In Larger Freedom, published by the former Secretary General Kofi Annan, where human security was epitomized as freedom from fear and freedom from want and the ability to conduct a dignified life. We at UNU added one more component, especially on the environmental hazards which affect human beings, to add that freedom from hazard impacts. Now, if you see these several dimensions of human security, you realize that in case of a crisis, especially if it's a financial crisis, this affects both stability and livelihoods. You have a deterioration on both freedom from fear and freedom from want. And especially if these features are not provided on a sustainable basis as part of sustainable development or as part of sustainability, we are already having a weakening of human well-being, which in a very marginal case you can say there is a weakening of human security.
So in a way you are saying that human security, the notion of human security, is a way to think about security issues in a more holistic or encompassing way, as a way to bring to the table issues of development but also environmental issues, right?
Yes, absolutely. Human security has several dimensions. Back in 1994, when UNDP first published a document on human security, they mentioned 7 dimensions: health, food security, personal security, political security, environmental security, and so forth. And this human security is defined at the scale where humans live and conduct their daily business, the space of their livelihood. It is both the state level, which is an original concern of UN, the avoidance of war to nurture the culture of peace. It is between sovereign states, but human life is usually taking place on a lower resolution level. It is happening in communities, in municipalities, and ultimately in the family or in the individual small groups of people. And human security has to be addressed at all of these levels. Otherwise, we are providing a very skewed definition of security. Peace between nations does not mean that the people are happy, whether their livelihood is in order, whether they can fulfill on the predicaments of human security, whether they are free from fear or they are free from what.
So if I understood you well, so human security is a way to move away from state-centric or military focused understandings of security, and it's a way to try to address a more comprehensive approach of human rights in the field of development, environment, and so on. And is it something which is essentially relevant for people in developing countries, or is it something which is also of relevance for developed countries?
I believe the concept of human security is universally relevant. Mm-hmm. It is the same aspirations which guide people and for which people strive are the same in developed and developing countries. Mm-hmm. Of course, it is sure that the human security is much more threatened in developing countries because of their different capacities to provide the elements and the security the different dimensions need. Mm-hmm. Just as mention one is let's say how to react on a calamity of natural origin. Mm-hmm. We have in floods and droughts both in developed and developing countries, mm-hmm. whereas the natural disasters or the disasters of natural origin destroy about 1 to 2% of the gross national product of developed countries. This percentage is 16% in case of developing countries. Mm-hmm. It is the proportions which are different, and this indicates that while the concept is universal, the weakness to provide human security in developing countries is of course much more apparent.
And so since the notion of human security is so broad, so wide, one has to think that the current economic crisis somehow is affecting the quality of human security around the world, both in developed and developing countries, let alone, if only because of the loss of growth, loss of the loss of growth, the loss of resources, and so on. So could you concrete, first of all, is it yes or no to my question, and could you give us concrete examples of how the crisis is affecting the state of human security today?
Unfortunately, there is a very direct link between human security or the deterioration thereof and the ongoing financial crisis. Mm-hmm. Let me focus on one particular aspect which was not yet addressed in UN documents, and this is the turning the tide of migration. Mm-hmm. Not long ago, everybody was talking about migration from developing countries toward developed countries, to go for the job opportunities, to go because of environmental deterioration in developing countries, and so forth. I just heard that the influx of illegal migrants from Africa to Spain incidentally came to a halt. Mm-hmm. In Spain there is 17% unemployment rate for the time being. Mm-hmm. And the news of there is no need for low-cost jobs for the time being spread very quickly. And also if you go to airports of those countries which deploy a large number of migrant workers, you see the backward flux of those people who were laid off, and they are now heading back to their country of origin. Mm-hmm. This is one load of those countries, that people who hitherto have been employed now go home and they are unemployed. Mm-hmm. But there is an additional component. While they were employed in developed countries, there were remittances, mm-hmm. which made a lot of positive impact on developing countries. The estimation of the private remittances of migrant workers was estimated to be more than the aggregate official development assistance provided by developed countries. Mm-hmm. Now, if this component is not anymore there, you can imagine that what looks like a banking crisis in the United States or in Europe or other developed countries very quickly trickles down to be a livelihood crisis in developing countries.
Mm-hmm. So migration is one of the striking examples of the impact of the crisis on the state of human security, and more specifically on developing countries. What about the environment?
Well, the environment is in a way also a kind of collateral victim of the financial crisis, because very frequently the money which was earmarked to improve environmental quality are suddenly there to improve or to rescue the banking system. If we are just see the staggering numbers which has been earmarked within a couple of weeks in European or in United States government to rescue the system-relevant banks and financial institutions, these are sums which environmentally conscious people were dreaming for a decade or for even 20 years to come to improve the environment. We are probably not yet deep enough in the financial crisis, or deep enough, I mean, in the time scale, to see the immediate consequences. But I'm afraid that the money we have to raise now to stabilize the system would be missing to stabilize the environment.
But precisely, we talk a lot about the notion of stimulus package in Europe, in America, in Asia, and so on. As far as you know, do you know whether or not resources are being allocated for precisely sustaining what is needed in terms of environmental needs within the context of this stimulus package as a way to precisely ease the impact of the crisis on these issues?
Personally, I wish we would be a little bit less hectic and more philosophical when conceiving rescue packages. Let me bring an example from the country where I am living now, Germany. Of course, it's a country which is quite famous from automotive industries, which is a backbone of the economic system. A lot of jobs are hanging on it. Now, one of the stimulus package which became the most popular is that there is a premium paid for the people who are ready to relinquish and throw out their old cars and buy a new one. Now, we are paying basically a premium that you are buying a new car which is still producing CO2, maybe a bit less than the previous old model, but still producing CO2. And it is 6 billion euros are earmarked for this program. Now, it's already shown that this money, 6 billion to have CO2 reduction is a lot of money, would have been a lot of money. There is a certain positive effect of it, and there is certainly not many people have been laid off in the automotive industries because of this stimulus. But we see other branches of economy suffer because the money the people now give out for a car is not in their pocket to buy something else. So it is something, I don't see yet the longer term political and also social consensus to look into this crisis as a crisis by the original meaning of the Greek word, the time to decide. To decide whether we are ready to change lifestyle, ready to change value systems, to say that most important is to get money, or most important is to have human well-being, more equitable distribution of the Earth's resources and services, and to contribute in a way to look into this human security question also from the question of equitable distribution of goods and resources and chances.
Which leads me to my next question. Actually, isn't it true? Couldn't it be argued that relying on the idea of a stimulus package in such a heavily way is in a way going back to business as usual, in the sense that it is really generating growth based on consumption. But precisely, it creates also all kinds of issues in terms of sustainability. So in the end, by ensuring that once again for the coming years growth is going to be based on consumption, isn't it in a way endorsing one more time a model of a paradigm of economic growth which is proving to be not sustainable?
Yes, you are right. The problem is that this crisis did not only come very swiftly and unforeseen by most of the so-called experts, but it also revealed that we do not have alternative models.
Yes.
So in a way, I showed this example of paying a premium to buy a new car, but after all, it is not unsuccessful in certain respect, this model. What we need, and now we need much faster than before, some kind of models to contemplate, to come forward, to agree on, or to test it, which are providing stability of the system, but not necessarily the system which proved to be so vulnerable and unsustainable, but to improve sustainability of the system, have checks and balances and controls in the system, and definitely, I referred already, a value system, when we realize that it is not the most important to get a very positive business output in a 3-month scale, but it is much more important to have a good decade for the company and for society, or not only a decade, of course, more, but I just compared to the prevailing economic indicators and scales upon which managers were judged whether they are successful. It was a 3-month performance. I mean, if we look into the school, we are asking children maybe and judge them every 6 months. And this is, of course, a completely different situation than in real life. Real life, the time scale of 3 months is ridiculous. You are basically obliged to act against sustainability.
And in fact, it becomes a self-destructive exercise. Precisely, so you are telling us that we're in the midst of this crisis, which we are told is the deepest since the Great Depression, and you're also telling us that in fact we are not having at our disposal the kind of intellectual and policy apparatus to really change our ways of doing things and of really growing and so on. So as an institute which is really focusing on human security, on environmental issues, your institute in Bonn, and I'm not asking for the answers and for the for the solutions, but I mean, what are the directions on which you are focusing to try to see what would be alternative models to the ones we have now, equating growth with consumption, basically?
Our institute in Bonn is particularly mandated to explore the environmental dimension of human security. So we are heavily working on the question whether ecosystem services or the deterioration thereof have an impact on human security, and also whether the loss of livelihood, especially ecosystem-based livelihood, may tempt people to migrate. So we were working on this question, but very much focused on this environmental dimension. We were not really working on the financial system, but now this interlinkage between a financial crisis and livelihood and securing livelihood for many people in developing world showed that we even have to be more interdisciplinary and more complex in our analysis.
Yes.
Now,
go ahead.
Being complex in analysis is a good news for scientists, but it's not good news for politicians who need solutions and formulations which can get parliamentary majority, which can be communicated to the people, and which can use as a very simple recipes to implement it in the political world. And my analysis is that we are lacking these recipes for the time being, because no one thought of these complexities and no one questions this financial system.
And yet, we are running out of time, and in a way, you see, we have very much to think about these things, because it has been argued again and again that the environment is at the receiving end of this economic system, and it is one of the reasons why, in fact, this economic system, which has produced this crisis, is being described as unsustainable, not simply for economic reasons, but for the damage that it creates to the environment. And in fact, Copenhagen is going to take place in 6 months' time. So I guess that you are beginning to try to outline what would be potential roadmaps for research, for policy research in this context.
Well, you are absolutely right, and it is also a very threatening scenario to think that if many people are losing their livelihood in the manufacturing or in the modern economies, if I may say so, and have to go back and even swell the number of people who are directly relying on their livelihood on ecosystem services like subsistence agriculture or forest management, that potential poverty would force people to exploit the only resource at their disposal, which are environmental or ecosystem resources, and then we may have an accelerated overuse of these resources, more land degradation, more loss of forest resources in developing countries as hitherto. And this is a very threatening scenario, because it would actually add on to what you mentioned, the CO2 dilemma, the climate change dilemma, which is ongoing and relatively well recognized, but it's much less recognized that we are having creeping processes, land degradation, loss of ecosystem resources, biodiversity in the same time. And these processes have a positive feedback with climate change. So if climate change is increasing, then this resource degradation would increase as well. And if we are losing some of the resources, especially those which could be used as binding CO2 and carbon storage capacities, then it is also increasing the climate change.
As a matter of fact, some of the economists with whom we spoke told us that if on the occasion of this crisis we only focus on the crisis per se and don't make the connection between the economic crisis and climate change, or if we don't see that this economic crisis is about the environmental crisis in the midst of which we are in fact missing the big picture and missing the boat. This is, for instance, the message which was given to us by François Bourguignon last week when we interviewed him. François Bourguignon, who used to be the chief economist of the World Bank.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. We really at a kind of juncture where we have to realize that we have a massive crisis at hand, and it is a massive crisis which has an imperative that we have a massive rethinking. Mm-hmm. And this is, there is no option as business as usual. Mm-hmm. I mean, saving banks to continue paying some people exorbitant salaries and having somewhere the losers, mm-hmm. because it's a nice slogan to say win-win, but sometimes we have a win and we do not want to see the losers.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. So precisely in this context, so we're going to have this UN World Conference on the economic crisis, and later in the year we're going to have the Copenhagen crisis. So, I mean, Copenhagen Conference, sorry. So,
I hope it's not a crisis.
No, we hope that it's not a crisis. But I mean, what would be the way to connect in terms of agenda setting, in terms of negotiation, discussions, in terms of, so what would be the way to connect these two conferences to make sure that they're not disconnected?
I believe there should be very soon, very soon, a kind of linking of these rescue packages and economic stimulus packages with sustainability, and also to say that well, okay, we rescued maybe car workers' livelihood for a couple of months or a couple of years, but it should be that we are rescuing only companies which are ready to invest and go into sustainable technologies, also in the automotive industry. And we have to really think of what does it mean. We are preaching public transport, but actually we all use individual transport. And now, are we ready as a society? And are we ready technologically? I mean, just take on some countries, how much is depending on cars and roads and road construction and the service industry for autos. In Germany, it's probably every fifth job. So and we are talking about a medium-sized economic power, or one of the leaders in the economic landscape.
Well, you know,
so you see, it is a very deep-cutting questions to be answered in developed countries, in the so-called leader countries, and also to realize that it is not only the problem of the Eurozone and those countries which have US dollar or Canadian dollar or Australian dollar as their currency, but it's a global question, and we won't be able to solve if we just fix the banks and do not address the ecological, environmental and humanitarian or human solidarity questions.
So it seems that we don't know not to have growth based on consumption, and consumption is not based is not bad per se. After all, you know, it's one way to really have the rights of people being satisfied and fulfilled. And you know, that's something which is very much needed in developing countries. So, but do you think that the greening of consumption would be a way to really ease or lessen the negative impacts of this economic model based on consumption?
Certainly, the consumption is in many countries is an overconsumption. And I believe this is also a very deep-rooted social question. We are developed, let's say, success models where the more you spend, the bigger car you have, the more expensive food you eat, the better respected you are. And this elements of unsustainable value scheme. So it's not only the production and the consumption is, but the value system is actually unsustainable. I was very astonished to learn that when some questionnaires, sociological, questionnaire actions were carried out in so-called developed countries with very high standard of living, but with this social pressure to perform and outperform the others, and in rural communities in African countries where many of the attributes of human life like health services, education, amenities were not comparable, people were still reporting to be more satisfied and happy with their lives than in the developed countries. So I'm not saying that let's change everything and strive over a very indirect or very fuzzy definition of happiness, but there is something we have to learn from people, that how can you have a good social life and be satisfied with less and not going for the more and more and everything to be measured on material scales.
So in essence you are saying, how can we have a culture, a materialist culture, which is not producing or the effect of spiritual poverty?
Well, this is definitely a very good formulation as you put forward. What does mean for us material wealth if there is a spiritual poverty is a price for it?
Mm-hmm.
This is definitely not a necessarily good situation. So, but we have very frankly, I don't think our economists have a zero growth model which would still please the people. We became the prisoner of the gross national product and grow or perish mentality.
Mm-hmm. As a way to bridge the issues which are going to be at the core of the economic conference and the one of Copenhagen at the end of the year, and as a way to end your conversation, what do you think should be the issues at the center of the Copenhagen conference?
Well, in Copenhagen we have to have the architecture and the objectives of a follow-up of the Kyoto Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm actually relatively optimist about the climate change, because if I let a review of the human threats or challenges we have to address, at least the climate change problematic is acknowledged that it is a rectification. Or environmental quality deterioration or deforestation in many parts of the world. These are by far less addressed internationally or acknowledged as a global problem than climate change. I'm not saying let's rank them and address the first. All have to be addressed. And but at least with the climate change, scientists and many of the concerned people succeeded to draw the world attention that this is a global problem. It is caused by unsustainable economic models. It is caused by, or as you said also, unsustainable value systems, and created a situation which has to be rectified, and we have to adapt to it, because some of the effects which are already measured cannot be undone in a time scale which we use for our planning. Mm-hmm. It is not a 10, 20 or 30 years to pedal back. If we are succeeding to pedal it back, it may take centuries.
I mean, to echo your call for a change of value, or for trying to see how we could have a better sense of what is a good life, I tend to think that the more we are empty within, the more we are eager to accumulate and see proofs of our existence and of the value of existence through accumulation.
Well, let's be very honest, it is not easy to change value systems. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about it, I'm almost we always, in this unsustainable way of thinking, we expect everything to happen within 1 or 2 years, mm-hmm. maximum. Mm-hmm. And I believe to change value system, to recognize that there is much more value and also human compassion, and as you said, this word of spiritual poverty, to fight not only material poverty but spiritual poverty as well. This would take, I believe, decades, but the thing is that it is a long-term change, and the long-term process should not prevent us not to start with it.
Professor Bogardi, we have reached the end of our conversation. I really thank you for sharing your ideas with us. Thank you for your insight. I am Jean-Marc Coicaud from the United Nations University, and you were following a conversation on the financial crisis and its impact on human security, and more specifically on environmental issues. Thank you for watching.